Ghost Rider's first clash with warp energy unfolds as a collision between two forms of supernatural power that should never coexist, each representing a completely different cosmic law. The spirit of vengeance is used to sensing the guilt, sin, and moral decay within mortal souls, but the warp is not made of souls in the way his universe understands. It is a sea of raw emotion, malice, fear, ambition, and despair, twisted and amplified by gods who feed on suffering. When Ghost Rider enters the Warhammer 40K galaxy, the initial moment he steps close to warp-tainted space feels like being submerged in an ocean of screaming psychic impressions. His Hellfire flickers violently, as if reacting to something fundamentally incompatible, something that lives outside the moral structures that define his judgment. The warp does not simply contain evil, it is evil manifested, emotion given predatory form. The moment his chain ignites, the fire burns blue for an instant, distorted by the psychic pressure surrounding him. As he rides across a demon-infested battlefield for the first time, the ground itself seems alive, pulsating with energy that resists purification. His penance stare, a power that forces victims to experience the pain they've caused, does not work in the expected way. A lesser demon bound in rotting armor stares back at him with eyes filled not with regret or repressed guilt, but with pure chaos, an entity with no sense of morality at all. Instead of forcing it to collapse under the weight of its own sins, the stare reflects back a storm of incoherent psychic madness that threatens to disrupt the rider's connection to the spirit of vengeance. It is in this clash that Ghost Rider realizes that the warp is not a place where justice naturally applies. It is a domain ruled by forces beyond human ethics, and he must adapt his powers to confront this alien corruption. The air around him grows hotter as hellfire pours from his skull, but the warp twists its flames, bending them into unnatural shapes, trying to snuff them out with tendrils of raw psychic force. The demons around him recoil, but not with fear, more with curiosity, as if intrigued by this intruder who carries a flame that is not born of the warp. The chaos energies attempt to probe the hellfire, seeking to corrupt it, absorb it, or twist it into another weapon for their gods. Instead, the fire responds by burning with even greater intensity, reacting to corruption as fuel. Ghost Rider senses that the warp does not understand sin in the way he does. It understands only power, hunger, and emotion. This makes his usual sense for guilt spiral into confusion as he feels billions of psychic echoes resonating across the battlefield, each filled with rage, terror, pride, despair, and countless other emotions that make no logical sense when experienced all at once. In the midst of this overwhelming energy, Ghost Rider swings his chain toward a hulking beast carrying the mark of Khorne. His hellfire wraps around the monster's body, but instead of reducing it to ash instantly, the warp-infused flesh fights back. The creature roars, its blood boiling yet refusing to vaporize, fueled by a god who demands endless combat. The rider pulls hard and brings the monster to its knees, the hellfire burning hotter until finally the warp's influence weakens enough for purification to take hold. When the demon collapses into a pool of evaporating psychic residue, Ghost Rider feels the warp scream, not from pain, but from irritation, as if it has merely been inconvenienced. As more demons surge toward him, the ground trembles and the warp bleeds through reality, distorting space and threatening to swallow him whole. Ghost Rider pushes forward, riding his infernal bike through a storm of ethereal claws, psychic blasts, and shrieking warp energies that try to peel away his very essence. For the first time in a long time, he feels something close to resistance, something that challenges the divine fire within him. The warp is not impressed by vengeance. It only respects dominance. So he leans into the fury of the rider, letting the fire pour outward in a massive wave that carves glowing cracks into the battlefield. Demons melt, the earth burns, and even reality shudders under the sheer intensity of the purification flame. Yet even with this victory, Ghost Rider recognizes that he has not weakened the warp at all. The demons regenerate somewhere beyond reality, the rifts reopen and new horrors pour through. He senses that this realm has existed for millions of years,
feeding on the emotions of entire civilizations. This is not a force that can be cleansed the way he purges mortal sins. Against the warp, justice feels small, not powerless, but insufficient. He understands that his flames can destroy manifestations, but not the source. The Chaos Gods themselves feel distant but aware, turning their attention toward this foreign power that burns without psychic corruption. They probe him from afar, testing his mind, trying to understand the essence of the spirit of vengeance. Ghost Rider tightens his grip on his chain, fully aware that he has entered a galaxy where sin is not an individual act, but a universal condition, where corruption is a cosmic law, and where his fire will be tested in ways it never has before. The warp is not merely a battleground, it is a living enemy, and it has just noticed him.
Spawn's dark encounter with the Chaos Gods begins with an immediate and overwhelming clash of wills, a silent confrontation that occurs long before any physical daemon approaches him. The warp reacts the moment Spawn steps into its influence, as if recognizing something familiar yet profoundly alien. He is a being forged in hell, sustained by necroplasm, shaped by betrayal, vengeance, and the agendas of demonic masters. But the Chaos Gods are not demons in the traditional sense. They are vast, cosmic embodiments of pure emotion and psychic force. They do not command armies through deals or bargains the way Hell's Lords do. They influence entire galaxies through instinctive tides of corruption. When Spawn enters their domain, they do not simply notice him. They dissect him, peel into his essence, and begin pulling at the threads of what makes him exist. The first presence he feels is Khorne, a silent wave of bloodlust and hate that crashes into his mind like a hammer. Khorne does not speak, but the sensation is unmistakable, an invitation to violence, a push to abandon all strategy in favor of pure slaughter. Spawn feels the familiar whisper of power urging him to give in to rage, the same internal pull he once felt when the Violator tempted him to embrace Hell's nature fully. But this is different. Khorne offers no deal, no promises, no temptations of personal gain. The presence simply commands, kill and keep killing. Spawn resists, not because he rejects violence, but because he refuses to be dominated. His power is his own now, no longer tethered to Hell's manipulation. The warp responds to his defiance with a pulse of irritation, as if insulted that a single soul would dare deny its influence. Then comes Tzeentch, a swirling mass of psychic colors and impossible shapes that flicker across his vision. Strategies, lies, futures, and alternate paths surge through his mind. He is shown visions of Earth, visions of Wanda, visions of 1,000 versions of himself living or dying in ways that contradict one another. Tzeentch is not trying to corrupt him through fear. It tries to disorient him, to fracture his sense of identity. Spawn feels the edges of his memories being tugged at, twisted into shapes that do not belong to him. His necroplasmic body shifts instinctively, trying to protect the core of his consciousness from being rewritten. But Tzeentch's influence is subtle and patient. It does not need to force him to change. It only needs to make him doubt himself. If he falters for even a moment, the warp will slip through the cracks. Nurgle's presence arrives next, a suffusing wave of rot, despair, and perverse comfort. It feels like drowning in poisoned warmth, the kind that drags the weary into submission rather than terror. There's an almost paternal tone to the presence, as though Nurgle is welcoming another damned soul into his infinite garden of decay. Spawn's necroplasm reacts violently to the intrusion, bubbling and boiling as it resists infection. But the warp does not attack his flesh. It targets his exhaustion, his loneliness, and the part of him that has suffered endlessly.
Nurgle whisperingly promises an end to pain. No more battles, no more manipulations, simply stillness and acceptance. The offer claws into his psyche because, for a moment, it aligns with the deepest and weakest part of himself. But even that moment of temptation becomes a battlefield as Spawn's will reignites. He did not fight hell just to surrender to another cosmic tyrant. The last presence is Slaanesh, a seductive and horrifying wave of sensation that digs directly into the emotional scars he keeps buried. Slaanesh does not lure him with pleasure, but with the pain he cannot let go of, the agony of loss, the love he cannot reclaim, the guilt he pretends he has overcome. It sharpens his regrets until they become weapons, turning memories into hooks that drag at the edges of his soul. Spawn feels the warp trying to open old wounds, to feed on his emotions until he becomes another puppet of excess and obsession. But this time, he fights back with cold clarity. His necroplasm burns black, countering the god's influence with a void-like resistance that surprises even the warp's own forces. As the four presences circle him like predators surrounding prey, Spawn realizes that the Chaos Gods are not simply trying to dominate him, they are trying to categorize him, to understand which emotion fuels him most deeply. Rage, despair, change, obsession? But Spawn is not powered by one emotion alone. He is a paradox, a damned soul fighting for redemption, a creature of hell who defies its rules, a warrior defined not by pure emotion, but conflict between every emotion he carries. The warp struggles to pin him down, and this confusion frustrates it. Chaos thrives on unpredictability, yet Spawn's inner nature is so contradictory that he becomes unpredictable even to chaos. The demons that finally emerge to confront him do so cautiously, as if sensing the god's uncertainty. They circle him with predatory fascination, sniffing at the necroplasm that radiates power they have never encountered. Spawn moves before they strike, unleashing tendrils of his suit and scorching blasts of necro-energy that rip through their malformed bodies. The demons reform, dissolve, and reappear, as if testing the limits of his abilities. Spawn adapts quickly, shaping his power into weapons capable of disrupting their psychic forms rather than simply tearing their flesh. With every strike, he feels the warp watching him more closely, studying him as both threat and curiosity. His presence challenges the natural hierarchy of corruption. He is neither servant nor rival in the traditional sense. He is something else entirely. Each chaos god pulls at him again, testing whether his path can be bent towards theirs. But Spawn's will remains unbroken. He is not here to be claimed. He is here because he chose to step into this nightmare, and that alone places him outside the expectations of a realm where all things are shaped by desire and fear. The encounter ends not with defeat or retreat, but with a silent acknowledgement from the warp itself. Spawn has entered its domain, resisted its gods, and refused to be consumed. And for the first time in centuries, the Chaos Gods find themselves facing a soul they cannot easily influence.
The Imperium, labeling both Ghost Rider and Spawn as major threats, begins the moment their presence is detected by the vast sensor networks, psychic relays, and astropathic warnings spread across Imperial space. The Imperium is built on suspicion, fear, and absolute control. Anything unknown is automatically considered dangerous, and anything powerful that exists outside the Emperor's authority is categorized as a potential heresy.
The first reports come from isolated outposts, where survivors describe an armored, skull-flamed rider incinerating demons and a cloaked, shifting warrior tearing through chaos forces with necroplasmic weapons. These descriptions do not bring relief. They bring panic. If these beings can destroy demons, they can destroy the Imperium itself, and that alone is enough for their names to be etched onto threat lists maintained by Inquisitors who specialize in exterminating anomalies. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica senses distortions around both supernatural entities that do not correspond to known warp signatures. Ghost Rider's Hellfire appears to burn outside warp physics, and Spawn's shifting necroplasm registers as an unstable spiritual anomaly that astropaths cannot interpret. Such signatures trigger the ancient protocols reserved for powerful Xenos warlords or rogue psychers of apocalyptic class. Psychers who attempt to read their energies often collapse, screaming about a judgment flame that does not belong to the warp, or a soul forged in torment but not bound to chaos. These fragmented visions only worsen the Imperium's reaction. In a galaxy built on strict definitions of the acceptable and unacceptable, anything that cannot be classified is immediately condemned. Reports escalate to the Ordo Malleus, the branch of the Inquisition tasked with dealing with demons and supernatural corruption. Their libraries contain records of 1,000 species and warp anomalies, but nothing matches entities powered by non-warp hellfire or demonic necroplasm that resists categorization. To Inquisitors, such unknowns are not fascinating, they are intolerable. If something wields power but does not draw it from the Emperor, it is an enemy by default. The Inquisition's first assumption is that Ghost Rider and Spawn may be new forms of chaos constructs or emissaries from unknown warp entities. Even the possibility that they are independent terrifies the Imperium even more. Chaos servants can be understood. Chaos monsters can be fought. But beings who do not follow the logic of the warp are unpredictable, and unpredictability is the Imperium's greatest fear. The High Lords of Terra receive early warnings describing 2 supernatural xeno-demons capable of mass destruction. No one cares whether these beings are actually Xenos or demons. What matters is that they exist outside Imperial control. The Administratum immediately drafts containment protocols. Space Marine chapters begin analyzing the limited data available, comparing Ghost Rider's Hellfire to warp flame manifestations of Tzeentch, and comparing Spawn's shifting armor to demonic possession. Neither matches. This only intensifies concerns. Anything that cannot be classified can only be labeled heretical, and any heretical miracle must be purged. The Adeptus Mechanicus studies the battlefield remnants left behind. Metal melted by hellfire does not behave like warp burns. Its molecular structure seems purified instead of corrupted. Necroplasmic residue from Spawn's attacks does not degrade into disorder. It stabilizes itself in patterns that break known physical laws. Tech priests declare this non-sanctioned metaphysics, a term alone that is enough to trigger extermination procedures. Even their machines, hardened against warp exposure, malfunction when trying to analyze samples. For the Mechanicus, this is heresy at a technological level, a violation of the sacred laws of matter. The Imperium's paranoia reaches a boiling point when a regiment of Imperial Guardsmen witnesses Ghost Rider annihilating an entire squad of demons without using warp-based power. To them, this is not a miracle. It is a sign of a rival god. Imperial doctrine allows only one god, and anything that demonstrates divine might outside the Emperor's light is considered a threat to the sacred order. The guardsmen's testimonies are cleansed, their memories interrogated, and their survival considered suspicious. The Inquisition wonders if these beings are manipulating mortal minds through unknown forms of psychic influence. The fact that Ghost Rider and Spawn show no interest in controlling humans is irrelevant. The Imperium never waits for proof before condemning. Political consequences spread. Planetary governors are instructed to report any sightings immediately under penalty of execution. Some worlds mistake the two warriors as signs of an impending chaos invasion and initiate full lockdown procedures. The ecclesiastici, upon hearing of a flaming skeletal rider delivering fiery judgment, declares him a blasphemous mockery of imperial sainthood. The idea that a creature could punish souls by its own authority is considered spiritual heresy. Spawn, with his demonic appearance and evolution shaped by hell, becomes a symbol of forbidden power, a walking reminder of everything the ecclesiastici fights to suppress. Within the Grey Knights, debates erupt over whether these entities are demons, anti-demons, or something entirely different. The possibility that they fight chaos does not absolve them. In the Imperium, even a weapon against chaos is heretical if it is not under imperial command. The Grey Knights are forced to consider that they might one day confront beings who can destroy demons faster than they can, and this uncertainty gnaws at them. They do not fear battle. They fear the possibility that these strangers might reshape the metaphysical balance in ways that undermine the Emperor's divine plan. The final push that seals their classification as major threats comes when an inquisitorial ship records a brief psychic surge as Spawn tears apart a greater demon and Ghost Rider consumes its essence in Hellfire that leaves no warp trace. The warp itself ripples with confusion. That single event proves these entities are capable of permanently destroying things the Imperium spends entire campaigns fighting. The potential danger becomes too great to ignore. If they can destroy demons so efficiently, what could they do to Imperial forces? Entire sectors could fall if these beings chose to turn against mankind. The Imperium acts only the way it knows, by condemning what it does not understand. Ghost Rider and Spawn become classified under extermination protocols reserved for the most powerful warp anomalies. Their presence becomes enough to mobilize fleets, dispatch inquisitors, and prepare entire worlds for possible purges. The Imperium does not care that these beings fight chaos. It only cares that they exist outside its control. And in the grim logic of Warhammer 40K, that alone makes them enemies of mankind.
Space Marines analyzing Ghost Rider's Hellfire begins as a battlefield observation, a moment where genetically engineered warriors trained to read every threat with precision find themselves staring at a phenomenon that makes no logical sense. The first recorded encounter happened when a squad of Ultramarines responds to a Daemon incursion on a war-torn hive world. They arrive expecting the usual horrors of the warp, mutated flesh, psychic flames, corrupted air, but instead find a skeletal figure wreathed in fire that burns too clean, too controlled, and too purposeful. Hellfire does not leave behind the telltale taint of warp energy, nor does it resonate with the psychic turbulence that normally marks a supernatural event. The Marines immediately begin their standard threat assessment, logging visuals, atmospheric readings, and thermal data, but nothing matches their existing classifications. Their helms record temperatures far higher than ordinary flame, yet the fire does not spread or consume the environment randomly. It burns only what Ghost Rider wills it to burn. Their Auspex units detect no warp signature, no psychic imprint, and no biological life signs. To a Marine, this combination is alarming.
something that appears demonic but carries no warp taint, is unprecedented. Their training dictates caution, and their discipline prevents panic. But there is a distinct shift in their stances as they watch Ghost Rider incinerate a group of Tzeentch Daemons with a single sweep of his flames. Daemons usually scream as they are banished back into the warp, their essence unraveling under the force of psychic disruption. But under Hellfire, they do not disperse in the expected way. They collapse into a purified ash-like residue that does not evaporate back into the Imperium. The Space Marines realize they are not witnessing banishment. They are witnessing destruction that leaves no remnant for the warp to reclaim. An apothecary kneels beside one of the residue piles and scans it in confusion. His instruments, designed to measure warp contamination, detect nothing. Instead, the ash is chemically stable, something that should not exist after a daemon is killed. The apothecary logs the matter as a paradox, noting that Hellfire appears to sever the psychic link between daemon and warp entirely. This alone is enough to elevate Ghost Rider's flame to an anomalous classification. Any weapon capable of permanently killing daemons is considered of extreme strategic significance and immediate threat, because only divine entities or specific holy artifacts have similar effects. The Tech Marines examine the ground scorched by Hellfire and find that the fire leaves behind a smooth, glass-like surface, almost purified rather than corrupted. Plasma weapons scar surfaces with melting, last fire leaves carbon burns, and meltablasts atomize everything. But Hellfire seems almost corrective, as if it burns away impurity instead of simply destroying matter. This behavior contradicts all known energy signatures. The Tech Marines begin to theorize that the flame works on metaphysical principles rather than physical ones. Yet even that explanation collapses when they attempt deeper scans, because Hellfire reacts to their machines, causing minor malfunctions as if judging their purity. This alarms the chapter's senior Tech Marines, who consider the possibility that the flame is sapient or semi-sapient, reacting not to matter but to morality. Such a concept is heretical in Mechanicus doctrine, but they cannot deny the data. Librarians later conduct psychic analysis from a distance, attempting to sense the nature of the flame. Psychic flames normally cause mental turbulence, distort perception, and leave a traceable pattern in the warp. Hellfire does none of this. To a librarian's sight, Ghost Rider appears as a void, a cold absence of warp presence surrounded by a flame that exists outside psychic law. When a librarian tries to extend his mind toward the flame, he feels a pressure, not hostile, but rejecting. It is as if the Hellfire perceives the librarian's soul and denies access, not out of malice, but out of principle. This unsettling experience forces them to consider an impossible idea. Hellfire may not just burn matter or souls, it may evaluate them. The Marines begin comparing the flame to holy relics of the ecclesiarchy, specifically the flames used by the Sisters of Battle. Some younger Marines wonder if Ghost Rider might be a form of living saint, but senior officers dismiss the theory because no saint manifests power that is entirely separate from the Emperor's light. Ghost Rider carries judgment, but not the Emperor's judgment. He burns sin, but not in the imperial way. This distinction is crucial. Anything that claims moral authority outside the Emperor is automatically investigated as potential heresy. The next stage of Marine analysis occurs during battle, as they observe Ghost Rider fight Chaos forces with brutal efficiency. Every time Hellfire touches corrupted metal, it purifies it. When it touches corrupted flesh, it annihilates it entirely. When it touches a mortal with guilt, it ignites with disproportionate intensity. When it touches someone innocent, it dims. This variable response confirms their worst suspicion. Hellfire seems to operate on criteria that Marines cannot predict. A weapon that chooses its targets based on moral state is a nightmare for Imperial command structures, because Imperial morality is defined by obedience, not personal virtue. A flame that judges could condemn even loyal soldiers if they carry guilt or doubt. The Marines attempt direct communication, but Ghost Rider does not respond to vox signals or verbal challenges. He only acknowledges individuals when he senses guilt or sin. This disturbs even veteran Marines. A weapon they cannot control is tolerable. A weapon that judges them is unacceptable. The final point of analysis occurs when a Marine captain steps forward, unflinching to face the rider. Ghost Rider does not attack him. The Hellfire dims around him. His honor is intact, and the flame recognizes it. But to the Marines observing, this confirms the terrifying truth. Hellfire is not a weapon. It is a moral force, and any force that judges outside Imperial doctrine is dangerous. For the Space Marines, the conclusion becomes unavoidable. Hellfire is powerful, unpredictable, and unaligned with the Emperor. It does not follow the warp, nor does it follow the Imperium. It follows only its own cosmic law. And that makes it something they must analyze further, monitor closely, and potentially prepare to fight if it ever turns against them.
Spawn overpowering multiple daemons begins as a simple clash of brute strength, but quickly evolves into a full demonstration of why necroplasmic power stands apart from anything the warp has ever created. The first confrontation happens on a battlefield twisted by chaos corruption, where daemons emerge from shimmering tears in reality, their forms constantly shifting in response to the psychic turbulence around them. Most mortals collapse under the pressure of their presence. Even Space Marines treat greater daemons with caution, knowing that each one is an extension of a god's will. But Spawn steps into their path with a posture that carries no fear and no hesitation. His cloak unfurls like a living shadow, tendrils rippling with energy that does not belong to the warp. This alone draws every daemon's attention. They smell corruption, but not their corruption. They sense torment, but not the kind the Chaos Gods crafted. They recognize power, but not a power they can command. The first daemon lunges toward him, a creature of corn armored in brass and bone. It swings a cleaver the size of a man, in a blur of murderous rage. Spawn catches the blade with a necroplasmic shield that forms instantly around his arm, sparks erupting from the collision. The impact shatters the ground beneath them. The daemon roars in frustration, expecting to overpower its opponent with sheer brutality. But Spawn pushes back, the shield pulsing with dark green energy that erupts outward and sends the daemon crashing into a ruined wall. The creature arises again, angrier but already wounded in a way warp beings are not accustomed to. Necroplasm does not just cut their flesh, it disrupts their psychic cohesion, weakening the threads that bind their essence to the warp. A horde of lesser daemons rushes him next, screeching and clawing, their bodies twisting into new shapes with each step. Spawn responds with a sweeping gesture of his hand, unleashing a torrent of necroplasmic chains that shoot outward like serpents. The chains wrap around daemons, constricting them with crushing force before exploding into raw energy that tears their bodies apart. Normally, when daemons die, their essence returns to the warp, dissolving into drifting psychic residue. But this time, the residue flickers and collapses. Necroplasm destabilizes it, preventing full reformation. The warp reacts like a wounded animal, sending a wave of psychic disturbance across the battlefield. Chaos does not like what it belongs to. A Teench daemon attempts a different tactic, hurling psychic fire that twists through the air in spiraling patterns. The flames wrap around Spawn, trying to mutate his form or corrupt his soul, but necroplasm absorbs the psychic assault, drinking in the energy like hunger itself. Spawn's suit pulses with new brightness, empowered rather than harmed. This terrifies the daemon more than any attack. To the creatures of Teench, psychic manipulation is absolute. Seeing their magic absorbed and repurposed breaks the logic they are built on. Spawn retaliates by launching a concentrated blast of energeta directly into the daemon's chest, piercing its core and causing it to collapse into a heap of evaporating ichor. A Slaanesh daemon slithers forward afterward, confident not in strength but in seduction. Its voice echoes in multiple dimensions at once, promising pleasure, release, and escape from eternal torment. It seeks cracks in Spawn's psyche, trying to evoke his memories of Wanda, his regrets, his longing for peace. Spawn's face remains emotionless beneath the mask, but his eyes burn brighter. Necroplasm responds not to temptation, but to emotional resistance. The Daemonic whispers trigger his pain, but pain fuels him rather than weakening him. He steps forward and drives his fist through the elongated torso, the impact sending a shockwave of necroplasm that dissolves the creature from the inside out. A massive Nurgle daemon lumbers into view next, a living mountain of rotting flesh that drips with acid and plague. The air curdles around it, disease spreads wherever it steps. Corruption radiates from its swollen body. Most warriors avoid direct contact at all costs. Spawn does the opposite. He leaps toward it, his cape forming jagged talons that drive deep into the blubbery hide. The daemon laughs, believing that nothing can harm a gift of Grandfather Nurgle. But then it feels something unfamiliar. Necrotic energy that competes with its decay, consuming it instead of succumbing to it. Necroplasm burns through corruption like fire through oil. The daemon panics, trying to envelop Spawn in clouds of toxic filth. Spawn's suit hardens, forming a protective shell that absorbs the impact before he tears the daemon apart with a blast of energy that leaves a massive crater where it once stood. Spawn's overwhelming success against multiple daemons is not due to raw power alone. It is because his power does not follow warp laws. Daemons are manifestations of emotion, belief, and psychic chaos. They expect opponents to operate within those boundaries. Necroplasm does not. It is forged in a hell outside their reality. It refuses to be categorized. It refuses to obey. This confuses the daemons, destabilizes their instincts, and prevents them from adapting. The more they try to understand him, the more they realize that his existence is an insult to chaos itself, proof that hell created something capable of rivaling the power of gods. As the battle intensifies, the warp begins to distort in response. Rifts expand, colors shift, and the air screams with psychic pressure. Daemons attack with desperation, not confidence. They swarm him from all sides, hoping to overwhelm him with numbers. Spawn's cape becomes a storm of blades, wings, tendrils, and shadows, shifting forms faster than daemons can track. Each movement is precise, violent, and final. His necroplasm becomes a weapon of absolute dominance, shaping itself to counter every threat, every mutation, every psychic anomaly thrown at him. By the time the final daemon falls, the battlefield is unnaturally silent. The warp retreats slightly, unsettled. Spawn stands surrounded by dissolving residue, his armor glowing with the energy he has absorbed. He has not just defeated the daemons, he has demonstrated that their greatest advantage, their connection to the warp, becomes their weakness against him. The creatures of chaos are used to being feared. They are used to being unpredictable. They are used to breaking reality. But Spawn breaks them instead, leaving the warp itself wary of a warrior forged in a different hell, one it cannot fully comprehend or control.
As the clash between Ghost Rider, Spawn, and the demonic hosts intensified across the shifting landscape of the warp, their combined presence began to distort the very metaphysical balance that governed the Imperium. Neither Ghost Rider nor Spawn belonged to the natural psychic ecosystem of this dimension. They were intruders whose powers stemmed from entirely different spiritual systems. Their energies did not harmonize with the warp, but instead collided with it, creating zones of instability where raw emotion and psychic potential were torn apart by the supernatural forces radiating from both of them. The warp reacted to them like an organism being wounded, thrashing and reshaping itself in violent bursts of color and sound. Demons, drawn by the unfamiliar resonance of their power, swarmed in ever-growing numbers, but they soon learned that these beings were unlike any mortal souls they had ever tasted or corrupted.
The demonic legions, steeped in millennia of torment and shaped by countless human fears, tried to overwhelm Ghost Rider with emotional manipulation, attempting to twist his sense of vengeance into something chaotic and unfocused. They whispered, taunted, screamed, and splintered into visions of past victims and sinners, hoping to dilute his purpose. But the spirit of vengeance was immune to their illusions. His power did not depend on doubt or fear, but on the absolute truth of guilt and justice. Every demon that approached him found its essence reflected back at itself, stripped bare by the penance stare, forced to relive the horrors it had inflicted across thousands of lifetimes. Many demons disintegrated on the spot, unable to withstand the overwhelming punishment. Even greater demons, constructs of pure emotion and unholy power, recoiled when his flaming chains carved through their forms, burning them with a fire that punished the damned rather than feeding the warp. Spawn, meanwhile, found himself wrestling not only with the demons, but with the warp's attempts to categorize him. The warp tried to interpret his necroplasm as some twisted form of psychic essence and responded by forming entities designed to consume it. But necroplasm was neither psychic nor emotional energy. It was a hell-forged substance that existed outside the warp's hierarchy. As a result, every demon that tried to drain it found its essence corroded and imploded by energies it was never meant to touch. Spawn weaponized this confusion by manipulating his necroplasmic suit, letting it mutate into monstrous shapes that tore through the eternal bodies of the demons around him. He created spikes, tendrils, blades, and constructs that devoured demonic matter as though feeding on corruption itself. Each strike destabilized the battlefield further, causing the warp to fracture into floating shards of memory and nightmare. Together, Ghost Rider and Spawn created a battlefield entirely unlike the ones fought by the forces of chaos. Ghost Rider's flames cleansed corruption, while Spawn's necroplasm mutated and consumed it. The warp roiled violently, unable to understand or categorize the paradoxes they represented. At certain points, regions of the battlefield went eerily silent as the warp momentarily collapsed into void-like pockets where neither psychic nor spiritual influence could operate. Other regions erupted into explosive storms of color, emotion, and screaming spirits as the warp tried to reassert dominance. Demons loyal to Khorne, charged with unstoppable rage, only to be dismembered by Spawn's shifting arsenal or reduced to ash by Ghost Rider's Hellfire. Those aligned with Tzeentch attempted to trap them in labyrinths of spells and illusions, but their sorcery unraveled into meaningless patterns whenever it encountered the foreign metaphysical laws that governed the powers of these interdimensional invaders. Even Nurgle's plagues wilted in their presence. Ghost Rider's flames purified disease and rot, while Spawn's necroplasm resisted corruption entirely, sometimes even transforming it into weapons of his own creation. Solanesh's demons found that their attempts at manipulation failed, for neither Spawn's tortured soul nor Ghost Rider's unwavering purpose could be bent toward indulgence or temptation. Their combined resistance frustrated the Chaos Gods, who found themselves observing a conflict they could not easily influence. They poured more power into their demonic legions, trying to force adaptation upon the warp. For a moment, the warp reshaped itself around two titanic manifestations of its own will, one forged from rage, another from despair. But even these colossal constructs faltered when Ghost Rider rode straight up their mountainous forms, his chain burning molten scars into their bodies, while Spawn pierced through their cores using necroplasmic lances that erupted like volcanic blasts. The warp, strained by their presence, began to birth entirely new forms of demons, experimental creatures whose existence defied its own traditional rules. Some appeared as swirling clouds of razor-edged emotion, others as shifting beasts with amorphous bodies attempting to countermeddle the intruding energies of Hellfire and Necroplasm. These new demons attacked with unpredictable rhythms and powers, but Ghost Rider and Spawn adapted just as quickly. Ghost Rider hurled his chains into their forming shapes, forcing their essence to anchor into something defined, which allowed him to obliterate them.
Spawn reshaped his suit into traps that absorbed fragments of their energy and repurposed it as raw ammunition. In this escalating cycle of adaptation and destruction, the Warp became a testbed of metaphysical evolution. Ghost Rider and Spawn, each an anomaly in their own right, disrupted the harmony chaos had maintained for uncounted ages. Their battle became more than a fight for survival. It became a clash of incompatible realities, each imposing its own laws upon the landscape. For every demon the Warp produced, Ghost Rider and Spawn offered a counterforce, and as their influence spread, regions of the Warp grew increasingly unstable, threatening to break into realms of pure nothingness or mutate into new fronts of spiritual warfare.
As the ripple of Ghost Rider and Spawn's presence spread beyond the immediate war zone, the Imperium began intercepting fragments of psychic turbulence that defied conventional categorization. Astropaths screamed as they glimpsed burning skeletal figures riding through the Warp, and Inquisitors demanded emergency conclaves to determine whether these visions represented new demonic entities or an emergent threat that even their most ancient records had failed to predict. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica issued warnings that the psychic echoes carried with them unfamiliar spiritual signatures, energies neither wholly warp-tainted nor aligned with any known Xenos or heretical source. To the Imperium, everything unknown was dangerous, and anything dangerous was a target to be purged before it could grow into a systemic threat. As reports accumulated, the Inquisition categorized the appearances of these two mysterious beings as a potential class extremist spiritual incursion, prompting cross-departmental coordination between the Ordo Malleus, the Ordo Xenos, and the Ordo Hereticus. Among the many responses triggered, the Grey Knights reacted with the most immediate concern. Their librarians attempted to scry the source of the disturbances, but found their visions clouded by flames that did not belong to the Warp, and shadows that defied Warp-based interpretation. These conditions were unprecedented, for even the most powerful Daemons left behind detectable psychic patterns that could be classified and countered. But the forces they now sensed operated outside these familiar rules. The librarians felt a strange repulsion, as if a force was actively rejecting the probing touch of their minds, pushing their consciousness out of the visions with supernatural precision. Some even emerged from the scrying chambers with their minds seared with memories of burning judgment, leaving them convinced that the entity they had glimpsed was not a servant of chaos, but something capable of punishing even the psychic observer. The Ordo Malleus dispatched strike cruisers to the region where the disturbances had peaked, hoping to contain or destroy the new anomaly before it spread further. Upon arrival, Grey Knight squads found the surrounding area stained with signs of metaphysical upheaval. Local fauna were reduced to petrified husks, their souls seemingly extracted through methods no daemon normally employed. Other zones were layered with necrotic residue, exhibiting properties similar to demonic ichor, yet chemically distinct from anything catalogued by the Ordo Malleus's archivists. The readings were contradictory. The Hellfire traces carried a purifying signature, while the Necroplasmic remnants suggested corruption without warp dependency. It was a paradox that challenged even the most experienced Inquisitors, and their lack of understanding pushed them toward the most extreme conclusions. Imperial Guard regiments stationed nearby reported witnessing a burning skeletal rider tearing through Daemons and Xenos creatures with equal ferocity. Soldiers swore they saw a cloaked figure wielding shifting weapons that devoured monsters larger than tanks. Commissars dismissed these as warp-induced hallucinations at first, but the similarity of the accounts from multiple worlds forced them to reconsider. When Imperial Guard Vox operators replayed intercepted transmissions from doomed outposts, the audio was filled with screams of Daemons and the sound of chains striking something massive. These reports reached several planetary governors who immediately requested reinforcement from the Adeptus Astartes, fearing that a new category of threat was emerging within their sector. Astartes chapters with heavy Puritan leanings pressed for immediate extermination of the anomalies. To them, the distinction between warp-spawned corruption and any other form of supernatural power was meaningless. If it defied scientific explanation and threatened imperial stability, it had to be eradicated.
Yet some more radical inquisitors argued that such beings, if properly controlled or redirected, could serve as weapons against chaos. They cited the accounts of demonic obliteration and suggested the entities might operate with some form of righteous purpose. This ideological fracture created tension within the Inquisition, spreading uncertainty and mistrust even among high-ranking officials. Meanwhile, tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus were fascinated by the remnants left behind. The Necroplasm reacted violently to mechanized instruments, dissolving augurs and purity seals alike, while samples of Hellfire-scorched stone emitted a soft, rhythmic hum, as though resonating with an intelligence that did not exist in the Imperium. Calculations and experiments produced inconsistent results, leading some tech priests to believe that the anomalies represented a new form of dimensional energy. Their curiosity drove them to request custodianship over the battle sites so they could harvest data, but the Inquisition denied them, fearing that the Mechanicus might inadvertently create weapons beyond Imperial control. On the frontier worlds closest to the disturbances, fears spread rapidly among civilians. Rumors flourished in taverns and market squares, speaking of flaming demons that hunted chaos, and shadowed saints emerging from the warp to punish the wicked. Preachers climbed atop ruined shrines to proclaim that these beings were divine avengers sent by the Emperor to cleanse the galaxy. Others warned that if these creatures were not stopped, they might bring about the prophesied end times. The Ecclesiastes issued direct orders for priests to quell such rumors, insisting that no force aside from the Emperor's divine light could judge souls, but the panic refused to die. Border planets caught between chaos incursions and these new spectral entities suffered the most disarray. Some commanders directed their forces to avoid confrontation, believing that if these beings were enemies of chaos, they might also become reluctant allies of convenience. Others, driven by fear or strict doctrine, ordered immediate engagement protocols, leading to unnecessary losses. Patrols vanished, Vox channels erupted with static, and reports mentioned vast shadows moving across the horizon, accompanied by unnatural flames. Even when Ghost Rider and Spawn did not directly interact with Imperial forces, their mere presence destabilized military operations by forcing commanders to choose between ignorance and aggression. The Imperium's leadership struggled to form a unified response. High Lords demanded clarification, but the answers sent to Terra were plagued by contradictions. Some reports classified the beings as Class Alpha Daemon princes. Others argued they might be lost Primarchs twisted by warp exposure. A few radical scribes nervously suggested they could be manifestations of ancient Terran myths somehow reborn through warp mutation. None of these theories satisfied the High Lords, and each only contributed to a growing sense of confusion. Without a definitive classification, the Imperium could neither declare crusade nor establish diplomatic contact, leaving the entire matter suspended in dangerous uncertainty. Amid all this chaos, the psychic shockwaves continued spreading, disrupting astrophatic communication across multiple sectors. Fleets diverted unknowingly into dangerous regions of the warp. Supply lines broke. Imperial worlds faced delays in reinforcement, and every time another disturbance erupted, every time another daemon was annihilated by Hellfire or Necroplasm, the Inquisition was forced to confront the terrifying reality that a new power had entered their galaxy, and neither loyalty nor heresy could easily define it.
The Imperium's fleets began to mobilize at full alert as reports of the supernatural anomalies reached multiple sectors simultaneously, each transmission more urgent and chaotic than the last. Astropathic networks were strained to their limits as the psychic echoes of Ghost Rider and Spawn's battles against demonic hosts reverberated across thousands of light years. Signals from planetary outposts described impossible destruction, entire demon contingents annihilated in seconds, lands scarred by hellfire that did not consume but purified, and necroplasmic tendrils that twisted through the battlefield, consuming matter and energy in ways that defied Imperial comprehension. Each fleet commander interpreted the reports differently. Some believed the beings were rogue psychers of unimaginable power.
Others thought they were new demonic avatars sent by the Chaos Gods to test Imperial defenses. The uncertainty amplified fear, leading to fragmented response protocols across entire sectors. Inquisitors of multiple ordos convened emergency councils aboard orbital fortresses, debating the proper classification and response strategy for the entities. The Ordo Malleus argued for immediate extermination due to the undeniable psychic and metaphysical threat, emphasizing that any being whose power rivaled or circumvented the warp's laws could not be tolerated. The Ordo Hereticus contended that their supernatural origins might be of a sort that could either be contained or weaponized if carefully studied, warning against premature engagement without understanding their nature. Ordo Xenos representatives raised concerns that these beings, though primarily appearing as combatants against chaos, might have agendas entirely independent of humanity's welfare. These debates were heated, as none of the Inquisitors had encountered a phenomenon so complex and unpredictable, and their discussions extended across weeks, sometimes devolving into accusations of negligence or heresy. The Adeptus Astartes were deployed as immediate response forces, with chapters chosen based on proximity, psychic awareness, and combat experience against demonic threats. Grey Knights led many of the initial encounters, as their specialized training in demonology made them the most capable of discerning the anomalies' true nature. However, even these elite warriors were confounded. Ghost Rider's Hellfire seemed to bypass the psychic wards and protections normally effective against Daemons, while Spawn's Necroplasm defied containment by their energy fields, melting and reshaping in forms that no librarian could anticipate. Observing the entities in combat revealed that they were not merely powerful, they were operating on principles outside the warp, challenging the very foundation of psychic theory and demonology that the Grey Knights had relied upon for millennia. On the planets closest to the anomalies, Imperial Guard regiments were placed under extraordinary stress. Troops witnessed landscapes morphing under the effects of Hellfire and Necroplasm, with demons disintegrating entirely, leaving no psychic residue for the warp to reclaim. Ordinary soldiers neither could understand nor rationalize these phenomena, leading to mass panic in some units. Commissars struggled to maintain discipline, executing those who hesitated or fled, but the unprecedented nature of the threat made even the most loyal soldiers question reality. Some Guard officers reported strange, almost sentient reactions from the battlefield itself, as if the ground and air were responding to the entity's wills, reshaping themselves to assist or protect them. These reports were sent up the chain of command, but were often dismissed as hallucinations caused by extreme stress, although repeated confirmations from multiple worlds forced the Inquisition to acknowledge their validity. Planetary governors issued emergency decrees to civilians, instructing mass evacuations where possible, and the immediate reporting of any sightings. Some regions descended into chaos, with local militias engaging what they assumed were demonic invasions, only to discover that the entities were selectively targeting only corrupted forces. Rumors spread that these beings were divine instruments of judgment, punishing the guilty while sparing the innocent, which clashed violently with ecclesiarchy doctrine insisting that only the emperor could judge the souls of mankind. The Inquisition dispatched priests to reassert control, but even their sermons were undermined by the undeniable results on the battlefield, where sinners were visibly punished and corrupted forces obliterated with unmatched precision. The Adeptus Mechanicus dispatched tech priests to study battlefield remnants, but instruments frequently failed when attempting to measure or contain the Hellfire or Necroplasm. Energy readings fluctuated unpredictably. Materials altered themselves in ways that violated known physical and technological laws, and repeated exposure caused delicate auger devices to malfunction entirely. Tech priests theorized that these substances represented a new form of dimensional energy, potentially sourced from outside the warp itself. They documented everything meticulously, aware that their findings could either be humanity's most powerful weapon or a danger too great to control. Many Mechanicus scholars argued for immediate retrieval of samples, but the Inquisition forbade contact until a clearer understanding could be gained, fearing contamination or unintentional exposure to forces beyond their comprehension. Fleet engagements began to incorporate new doctrines based on observation rather than understanding. Ships were ordered to maintain distance while monitoring psychic signatures and preparing contingencies for unexpected warp fluctuations. Battle plans were rewritten on the fly, as Ghost Rider and Spawn's interference altered both the composition of Daemonic forces and the effectiveness of Imperial weaponry. In some sectors, the entities inadvertently aided Imperial defense by eliminating Daemonic reinforcements, yet their presence also destabilized command hierarchies and made coordinated response more difficult. High Lords of Terra received continuous updates, each one more perplexing than the last, forcing emergency councils to convene with the rare acknowledgement that human comprehension alone could not dictate the outcome of the unfolding events. In the midst of these complications, isolated reports describe civilians encountering one or both of the entities. Survivors spoke of Ghost Rider delivering fiery judgment to those who had committed atrocities, leaving towns free of malevolent influence afterwards. Spawn's appearance was even more enigmatic. Some saw him as a savior, others as a harbinger of doom. These testimonies, while anecdotal, influenced public perception and caused significant unrest. Some planetary populations began worshipping or fearing them as divine or infernal forces, challenging the Imperial's monopoly on faith and authority. The Inquisition scrambled to control the narrative, sending agents to suppress rumors and document every interaction, knowing that even a single misinterpreted event could spark rebellion or heresy on multiple worlds.
The culmination of conflict between Ghost Rider, Spawn, and the combined forces of the Warhammer 40K galaxy reached a scale that defied conventional comprehension, stretching across star systems already ravaged by centuries of war. Imperial fleets scrambled to contain the anomalies, while Space Marine chapters, Adeptus Mechanicus contingents, and planetary defense forces coordinated desperate strategies against the incoming Daemonic hordes. Yet, amidst all this chaos, Ghost Rider and Spawn operated with a singular focus that neither the Imperium nor Chaos could predict or fully understand. Their movements reshaped entire battlefields, as Hellfire and Necroplasm combined to erase corruption and punish sin in ways that circumvented the normal mechanics of the warp, leaving both Daemons and mortals alike in awe or terror. Strategic positions that had been carefully calculated over months of campaign planning were rendered irrelevant by the sudden appearance of a flaming skeletal rider or a shifting armored figure whose very presence defied physics. In the thick of orbital engagements, Ghost Rider's chains lashed through formations of Daemonic vessels, the Hellfire burning so intensely it tore through warp-infused shielding as though it did not exist. Entire squadrons that had relied on psychic propulsion or warp-based weaponry found themselves destroyed before they could even engage their targets. Spawn, in turn, leapt from one derelict cruiser to another, his necroplasmic forms mutating into wings, blades, and shields that allowed him to navigate the chaos with supernatural precision. The interaction of their powers destabilized the warp corridors used by both fleets, creating unpredictable rifts that swallowed reinforcements, warped trajectories, and altered the battlefield in real time. Commanders, whether loyalist or renegade, struggled to issue coherent orders when reality itself seemed to be bending around two entities whose powers defied categorization. On planetary surfaces, the psychological effect on troops was immense. Guardsmen who had spent lifetimes training to face Daemonic hordes, Xenos invasions, and rogue psychers found themselves witnessing acts that challenged everything they had been taught. Ghost Rider's flames did not merely burn, they judged, incinerating the guilty while leaving the innocent untouched, forcing soldiers to confront their own morality under fire. Spawn's necroplasmic attacks reshaped terrain and structures in ways that were both terrifying and awe-inspiring, creating barriers, weapons, and traps instantaneously in response to enemy maneuvers.
Civilians and planetary militias could barely comprehend the scale of destruction and precision, interpreting the events as signs of divine intervention or damnation, further complicating the Imperium's attempts to maintain order and control. The Daemonic hordes, meanwhile, faced an unprecedented dilemma. Khorne's warriors of blood found themselves being incinerated before they could taste battle. Tzeentch's schemers discovered that their spells were inverted or nullified by Spawn's necroplasm adaptive nature. Nurgle's plagues were eradicated or transformed into weapons against their own forces. And Slaanesh's temptations failed to manipulate either entity, leaving their avatars confused and enraged. The Chaos Gods themselves were forced to divert considerable psychic power to simply maintain coherence among their followers, struggling to prevent catastrophic losses that could ripple through the warp. Entire Daemon worlds trembled as their constructs were torn apart, destabilizing the local psychic environment and forcing retreat or realignment on a scale rarely seen even in the most brutal conflicts. The Imperium attempted to leverage these anomalies for strategic advantage, but control proved impossible. Space Marines and planetary defense forces tried to coordinate their movements with Ghost Rider and Spawn, but the entities acted independently, unconcerned with human command structures or objectives. Attempts to restrain or guide them were met with limited success, as the Rider's own moral and tactical code dictated their actions. They focused on neutralizing corruption and punishing malevolent forces, rather than aligning with the Imperium's strategic goals. While their intervention saved countless lives and annihilated threats that would have required entire crusades to eliminate, it also introduced chaos into operations that were otherwise meticulously planned, creating opportunities for enemies to exploit disorganization caused by their unpredictable interference. Amidst the destruction, the warp itself began to react in unprecedented ways. The constant purging and destabilization caused by Hellfire and Necroplasm created zones of extreme instability where reality bent, time fluctuated, and psychic turbulence reached levels capable of collapsing entire planetary systems if unchecked. Daemonic energy surged erratically, creating mini-storms of psychic feedback that threatened both chaos and Imperial forces. In these zones, normal battle tactics failed. Weapons misfired, communications broke down, and navigation systems were warped. Ghost Rider and Spawn operated with an intuitive understanding of these instabilities, moving through them with precision while all others were forced to adapt in real time. Their presence amplified both danger and opportunity, creating a tactical environment entirely unlike any recorded in Imperial or Xenos histories. The culmination of these events created scenarios where entire war zones were transformed into theaters of metaphysical warfare. Mountains of demonic corpses and scorched landscapes dotted battlefields, while necroplasmic fortresses rose and fell at will. Fleets were shattered not by sheer numbers but by precision interventions, their ships disintegrated or reconstituted by forces outside Imperial comprehension. Commanders, whether loyalists or renegades, struggled to recognize that the Imperium's tactical strategy is insufficient, and whole campaigns needed to be rewritten on the fly, taking into account variables that no strategy manual could anticipate. Ghost Rider and Spawn acted as forces of balance and destruction simultaneously. Their intervention reshaped the outcomes of conflicts across scales, ranging from single skirmishes to multi-systems engagements. Even in moments of apparent calm, the battlefield remained charged with potential upheaval. Areas cleansed by Hellfire and Necroplasm became strangely quiet, almost sacred, while areas untouched by their intervention roiled with warp energy and lingering demonic presence. The contrast between these regions highlighted the scale of the entity's impact. They were not merely powerful warriors, but forces capable of reshaping the metaphysical and strategic landscape of the galaxy itself. Imperial scholars began to record every encounter meticulously, theorizing about the long-term consequences for both the Imperium and the warp, while military planners scrambled to incorporate this unpredictable variable into the ongoing war effort.